This is the Dane Moore NBA podcast brought to you by Prize Picks coming in Monday morning. It's January 15th after the Wolves 109-105 win over the Los Angeles Clippers on Sunday night. We got a little schedule change this week. Chris Hine, who normally does Mondays with me, is going to go Tuesday afternoon because he's flying out to Detroit. So we bumped up Britt Robson today. What's up, Britt?
Hey, how's it going?
Good. Let's talk about this game. I mean, that was one of the most one of the best basketball games I think we've seen all year. And also, I think one of the most informative for this Wolves team and what they can do and what we envision they'll be able to do, maybe particularly in the playoffs. I came into that game last night thinking about how a week ago, me and Jace were picking teams we think would beat the Wolves in a playoff series, and we kind of both agreed that the Clippers were the ones that we would be most concerned about in any sort of playoff matchup. But it wasn't really based in anything yet. We hadn't seen the Wolves play the Clippers. It was probably based more in having watched the Clippers recently and been like, okay, this thing is coming together. But we see that game last night, and it's hard to not adjust, I guess personally, not adjust my opinion some on what that matchup would look like in the playoffs. What did you think about the Wolves Clippers as a matchup this season before last night? And how did last night's game evolve your perception of that?
I frankly was hoping they wouldn't get, not blown out, but they wouldn't get a coasting 12 to 15 point victory. That would not have surprised me if the Clippers had disposed of the Timberwolves in not too dramatic fashion.
Mm-hmm.
Like you, a lot of it is recency bias. I mean, the Clippers, if anybody's been watching the Clippers for the last month, they've been amazing. I mean, they've been the best team in basketball, in my opinion, watching everybody, whether it's the Bucks or the Pacers recently, the Celtics. And a lot of it has to do with the fact that their stars have totally bought in to the idea of like unity for a ring. They've got 3 or 4 or 5 Hall of Famers on the team. And a lot of those guys, Kawhi being the notable exception, don't have rings. And Harden and Westbrook in particular have become extremely unselfish, and both of them are renowned for their ball hogging. And so to have that, and then to have 2, in my opinion, great role players in that starting lineup, Terrence Mann being able to be put in the starting lineup once the Harden trade was made, because you didn't need a point guard now because you had Harden, and you have one of your best wing defenders. And then Zubac, who didn't play last night, which I think was a big loss for the Clippers. I think he was particularly missed on screens.
Sure.
I think that he always has hurt the Wolves with his physical play. We haven't seen him that much against Rudy. But I do think that they would have been better shooting from outside in particular, especially in the first 2 or 3 quarters when they had a lot of problems with that. But, I mean, part of that is that you play with who you have, and they've got almost everybody else there. Tice did not play badly. So there's a lot of, you can't put all that much stock in that. I thought the difference wasn't that the Clippers played badly, although I believe they shot badly. I think the difference was that the Wolves played smarter and more purposefully than they have been in recent games. And
it was one of those games where you just said to me, you're like, oh, they're ready. You just kept saying that in the first quarter, and you're like, no stray shit. Like, it was like they were dialed and they were ready. And that has been something we have seen from this Wolves team, not every single game and not against every single big opponent, but they do have this gear. And again, I was skeptical they were going to be able to turn it on against the Clippers last night, but they did.
And a lot of it is in the decision making. let's face it, if somebody is dribbling incessantly, usually Ant, but it can be McDaniels, occasionally it can even be Conley, slow-mo. There are a lot of dribblers who are surveying the court, and that's just not their game. Their game is to get off it quickly when they're humming. And the same thing on defense. Their game is to fly around and not have set positions. And the Clippers force you to play that way. So if you don't play that way, you're going to get killed.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things I was looking for, is whether or not they would choose a matchup and just beat you over the head with it. And aside from Norman Powell, that didn't happen. And so, I think that was Ant on Kawhi seemed to work pretty well when Jaden wasn't on Kawhi, and Paul George seemed to be taken care of pretty well. I just think that they switched well defensively. Gobert had another one of those games where you just shake your head. He was one of their best perimeter defenders last night.
He was.
That's nuts. When you think about it, how infrequently could they burn them with Gobert out on the wing? First of all, his length prevented any meaningful passes for the most part. And secondly, I thought the Wolves were fairly alert in filling in behind him and playing pretty well through that.
Yeah.
And of course, yes, the Clippers missed some open shots. That's undeniable, especially Paul George. But the Wolves just played really, really smart two-way basketball for most of the game. They had their usual bevy of turnovers at different places, but I didn't feel it was. The Clippers have a lot of length and a lot of experience, and they play good defense, especially when they have to. And they were a desperate team down the stretch. So, they gave it to Paul. Westbrook hit 2 open, threes above the break. You got to give him those shots most of the time.
Yeah.
I thought that.
Well, let's talk about what type of defense is required when you're playing the Clippers. And because I think that's particularly interesting, given we've seen these 2 Celtics games, right? On Thursday and then earlier in November when they played them.
2 overtimes.
Yeah, 2 overtimes. And you kind of go into, I guess you leave those Celtics games and you're like, are the Celtics a good matchup for the Wolves? You question that idea and how good of a matchup. It's kind of like the Nuggets thing. We say that too about the Nuggets. But it's easier for me to define how, quote unquote, the Wolves match up easily with Denver. They have a good way with the double bigs of being able to guard and maybe kind of slow Jokic. The thing I'd been struggling with the Celtics idea was, and what I had kind of just come to was, I think they just kind of turn up for that opponent. But after watching this Clippers game, it kind of affirmed the notion, and we talked to the guys in the locker room about this afterwards, that if you are saying the Wolves match up, quote unquote, well with the Celtics or the Clippers, it's their ability to just guard in isolation, just stand up the man in front of them. And I think particularly, I guess with both teams, but particularly last night, it requires that one-on-one isolation defense, right, to line up your man. And if you present enough resistance, then that isolator is going to kick and force your defense to scramble and do the fly around, as we call it, or as Finch calls it. And I thought the Wolves did a really good job last night of the combination of those 2 things, handling their man in isolation often enough. And when that isolating man kicked it out, they effectively scrambled, flew around, the X outs we talk about all the time, that sort of thing. And that is, the Clippers and the Celtics are better than a team like the Sacramento Kings, but I think the Wolves are matching up better with these isolation teams than they probably are the ball movement type teams. And And I think if you had to pick between the two, you would choose that. You would choose the former and the ability to guard in isolation and scramble out of that.
And I think a lot of that has to do with the way, especially their younger players, envision being a good defender.
Totally.
Both Jaden McDaniels and Anthony Edwards love the mano a mano. All right, see if you could beat me, you know. And less so the team ball concept. And I really think that in some respects, what impressed me about Jaden last night wasn't the, mano a mano, because he always has been good at that. But he was doing a lot of very quick help and recover. One of those things where they know that the Clippers themselves are not ball movement teams. So what they try to do is just give them a little bothering on ISO and then return. And sometimes just that slight distraction. I think it bothered Paul George and even to some extent Kawhi. And then every now and then to have Rudy Gobert face up with you 16 feet out or even like 12 feet out or whatever. That's a whole new wrinkle. And they refused to immediately get off it with Gobert, which is another thing I thought was interesting. There wasn't a lot of, pass, and the one play, it was still like, I thought the best play of the game. It wound up with a Clippers 3 sometime late in the third quarter, early in the fourth quarter. The Wolves just guarded everything, and there were at least 2 driving kicks.
3. The one you're talking about, the Paul George in the corner one at the end?
Yeah. And there were a couple of traps on that play that the Wolves did too. They basically trapped the ball handler who got off it quickly, which isn't what the Clippers usually do.
It's one of those plays that, like, if Paul George misses that 3, somebody posts it on Twitter and it goes viral because, like, look how good the Wolves are.
It was one of the Wolves' best defensive possessions of the year.
It was.
I don't care if Paul George hit that 3.
Right.
I mean, you just put up a banner when your team is on a string like that and just busting their ass, and not only busting their ass, but hustling with anticipation of where they're going as they're going there. That's the key to those split second being able to be there versus not quite being there. And they were there for everything. Paul George had a tough 3. It was wonderful. And so I keep going back to the fact that defense is this team's calling card. You are right that in the playoffs in particular, if you can find a matchup and beat it to death, you have a huge advantage. And teams that have multiple stars who are good in isolation generally are thought to be able to do that better than most teams. And so the Celtics and the Clippers both qualify there. And yet the Wolves have a defense and a scheme in 3 games we've seen against those 2 teams where they've won 2 and lost 1 in overtime. So,
let's play that. Let's play that clip of Ant liking playing against these type of teams.
And they have a lot of guys that like to ISO the one-on-one. Just as a prideful defender, like how much do you look forward to just staring them down and going,
it's like one of the best things in basketball, going against the Clippers. That's why I look forward to playing them all the time, because regardless of who in front of Kawhi, PG, or James, they're going to try to ISO you. So we got to take pride in that challenge and try to stand them up. Kawhi gave me like a tough bucket today. But other than that, I think I did a pretty good job.
It's all these clips today are going to be. It was a very loud locker room, as you can attest to, Britt. But I hope you guys are able to still hear these on the other end. I just think that's a big thing, that Ant likes it, and like you said, Jaden likes it too. Because those are hard. Those are oftentimes the hardest things and ways to defend, and it's really it's what they're good at, because what they're bad at, Ant more so, or not as good at, is navigating screens and playing off ball and finding those sort of things. I was thinking a lot last night about how after that Pelicans game, I kind of came to the conclusion that the best matchup for Zion Williamson that the Wolves have is Anthony Edwards. And the answer for that is obviously not Ant's size necessarily or positional distinction. It's that he likes and
the dog. It's the dog.
He could square him up and just stay in front of him. You can you see that when Ant knows that the guy against him is trying to go through him. And I like Ant a lot in those situations because I have a confidence in his ability to move his feet and at least kind of present some resist. I mean, how many times does somebody just blow by Ant in isolation? That is extremely rare.
Yes.
How many times does Ant get caught looking behind him or a step below when there's a back screen or gets clobbered by a screen on ball or whatever? That's the difference. Ant is a huge weapon for this team defensively, and at times he's a huge liability defensively for this team. That liability goes way down against a team that plays heavily in isolation.
For some crazy reason, I decided to go to both coaches' pre-games yesterday, which is kind of rare for me. It's because everybody else was watching football, and I'm busy trying to do basketball. And
good work.
And so I went to Ty Lue's press conference, and I think it was Grady who asked him a little bit about the World Cup or whatever. It may have been Alan Horton. It was one of the announcers. And Ty Lue said that the question was, Ant wasn't expected to be a starter, on that team, and immediately kind of announced himself as a starter. How did that happen? And he said, well, he actually did it with his defense. The first practice, he walked in and basically announced that he was going to be the alpha on the team. And then people bought into it by the way he got into players on pick and rolls. And I don't know the context of it by Lue. I don't know. He said he did it better than anybody I've seen. And I don't know I'm pretty sure he must have been talking about the team. The World Cup team, because Ty Lue has seen, a lot of players. So that's what I'm assuming. You don't think
he's the best pick and roll defender Ty Lue's ever seen?
Right. Or he said getting into people, and one of the things about Ant is he's so unbelievably strong.
Yeah.
And his athleticism is as much brute strength as it is springiness. Yeah. And the fact that he can go through picks in a manner that if you're strong enough, you can go through a pick without as much resistance simply because the person screening you does not imagine that you're going to be moving that hard, that fast.
Right.
And so they don't offer up, you steel yourself for a big burly guy to run into you. If Ant is going into you, you just figure you're setting a pick. And Ant can go through you without really causing a lot of disruption. So I just thought that was interesting and he said, and after a few of these practices, everybody went, oh, okay, Ant's kind of the leader of this team.
Right.
And the fact that he did it with defense, which, just for grins, I look, these on-off things for one game are always wildly crazy because it's such a tiny sample size. But I just wanted to look at Ant last night because I thought he made a huge impact on the game.
Sure.
And when he was on, their offensive rating was 120.8. Their defensive rating was 105.3. So plus 15.5. When he was off,
game, yeah.
Yeah. And he played 38 of the 48 minutes. In the 10 minutes he was off, the Wolves' offensive rating was 94.1, and their defensive rating was 147.1.
Holy So they got killed.
So, in other words, and some of that, to be fair, is probably Norman Powell's on the court and Ant isn't. Norman Powell created a bad defensive rating for everybody. That dude was flame throwing last night.
Yeah, it was in the late first, or I guess it was early second, once Ant subbed out. That was the rough stretch of the game, where they weren't guarding, and that's where the Clippers, after the Wolves got up by like 15 or whatever in the first quarter, the Clippers brought it back there. But yeah, Ant. I want to talk about Ant. I thought it was one of Ant's outside of a handful of turnovers, one of his just best games of the entire season. But let's grab a break here first. Today's show is brought to you by Falling Knife Brewing Company. Just as we try to do on Mondays, kind of let you know what is going on at Falling Knife this week. Obviously, the Wolves play the Pistons on Wednesday and the Grizzlies on Thursday. Keep in mind, those are slightly different times than normal. The game in Detroit is a 6 p.m. Local start. So if you want to go to Falling Knife for that, maybe a little bit earlier, you can get home a little bit earlier as well. On Wednesdays, though, they do have Trivia Mafia going on there too. So if you're looking for exclusive Wolves watching, there's going to be some other stuff going on there too. But, it might get to the second half of the Pistons game and you might go, maybe we could handle some trivia here as a distraction. If it's anything like that Portland game. And then on Thursday, they are unveiling their new beer for first new beer of 2024. It's called Lipstick Stigmata. It's they described it to me. It's a double dry hopped hazy double IPA that is going to explode with tropical and citrus notes. That comes out on Thursday. Wolves play the Grizzlies on Thursday night, 9 p.m. They stay open late for those late games, and then Saturday against the Thunder. So as always, we're keeping Falling Knife on the radar for going to watch these games with other Wolves fans. And then the other thing I just want to hit on is we do have 2 tickets to give away for the Memphis game on Thursday night. If you are a Patreon subscriber or want to become a Patreon subscriber, patreon.com/DaneMooreNBA, you let us know that you're available for that game. Again, it's a 9 p.m. game. Only let us know if you are available and can go to that game. We'll pick somebody randomly and give you 2 lower level tickets to that game from the Genesis Company. Again, that's this Thursday coming up. So let us know. Patreon.com/DaneMooreNBA. It's a way for us thanking those of you who have been supporting us, and also a way if you want to support the show and help fund the show. Again, patreon.com/DaneMooreNBA. I want to keep talking about the defense a little bit here. I want to get to Ant some more too, Britt, but our Ant's offensive game. We were talking about Ant defensively. We got to spend a little bit more time on what Rudy did defensively in this game. And I think the way this clip is you and I asking Rudy questions after the game about his defense and what went well and how they, how he was able to impact the game. Here's Rudy.
Job against Boston and this team, the Clippers tonight, where they really want to isolate against you guys. Why have you been so effective defensively against that style of offense?
We got people that can guard. We got people that can move their feet, that take the challenge personally and create the mind.
World be free good world.
And we got a lot of guys that already that I can sleep peacefully knowing they can guard those guys and make their life hard. Obviously they're still gonna at times hit tough shots, but we're confident, with having those guys guarding.
What's that change for you then, like having that confidence in them guarding at the point of attack and you being able to kind of come over to?
I mean, I'm still there. They see my face behind in the background, but they got to go through these guys first, and the main thing that I tell them is not to foul, show our hands, and if you're gonna get beat, I'm there, and then I'm there for the rebounds, which is very important.
But also, I mean, you switched out on a lot of, mid guys, wings tonight, and had to stay there because of how good they are in ISO.
Yeah.
I mean, you're roaming a lot more this year, but like this kind of an opponent is a litmus test. Is that? I mean, this is what you're going to see in the postseason too. So.
I love it. When I say we got guys that can guard, I put myself in that group too.
Right. But I mean, the trust behind you is obviously important.
For sure. And I love that. They trust me. I trust my teammates, and I've got anyone one-on-one.
Britt, this has been something since Gobert, even like the Gobert trade. I mean, we did like a pod the day of the trade, and the question that started for us then and has been throughout the course of time is what happens when you do need to be playing Rudy in a more aggressive scheme or in a switching type scheme. Can he do that? And, you'd only kind of seen it in little pockets over his career. They were loath to kind of do that in Utah over time. Even Rudy was. But we've seen this actually now pretty consistently for 100 some games now that Rudy's been in Minnesota. A greater willingness to come up, show, or even if it's kind of like a drop, if it needs to turn into a switch, he's cool with it. And that was one of, if not his best games, playing more up, aggressive. You asked him about blocking a bunch of mid-range shots and guarding those sort of guys. That defensive game from Rudy Gobert, that tape, you watch that. If you're a scout who really questions the Wolves in the playoffs and what they can do and how they can defend and how you're going to try and make Rudy Gobert move and switch and all that stuff, that film does a hell of a lot to make you feel more confident about the Wolves' ability to defend in the playoffs, I think.
And what I always found amazing about Gobert this season versus last season is that he's not distracted. I mean, you heard it even then on the answer to your second question about, they see me, or on maybe it was your first question. They see me, they see my face, or, in
the background.
He is a rim protector identity is never going to be shed by him. I mean, that's always going to be his main thing. And I will tell you that his rim protection is better this season, I think, because he is on the move and he isn't. I think he was overly critical of his teammates last year. And I think a lot of that had to do with the fact that he was spoiled in Utah. I've said this before, but everything revolved around him in Utah, and it was the right way to play, so on and so forth, was to let Rudy take care of everything else. You take care of the perimeter. Well, that doesn't work in the long run in today's NBA. And he's had to become much more of a partner, both. And I think the partnership in the mid-range is something he's willing to do and always has been kind of willing to do, but always had the excuse of, well, the partnership at the rim is bad. I mean, there's nobody who can defend the rim like I can. And when I go out and be a partner in the mid-range, our defense is going to be worse because the people filling behind me aren't going to do their jobs. Yeah. And so even though he says we got people on the perimeter who can defend, they've also got some great fills in back. And if Rudy does his job, you don't need a Rudy Gobert at the rim if you have a Rudy Gobert in the mid-range guarding on the ball. And I'm glad that he has bought into that as much as he has bought into it. And that is, I put out 4 questions in my season preview. The number one question I had for this team was, will he be able to incorporate some of the Wolves concepts of defense with the Utah concepts of defense? That question has been answered to 98%, hopes.
Sure.
That has been done. I mean, I was even basing that on 22, 23 Rudy Gobert, and we're getting 23, 24 Rudy Gobert, which is kind of like 19, 20 Rudy Gobert. It's vintage Rudy Gobert on defense. Also being somebody who can guard out 12, 15 feet. And he was a 3-time defensive player of the year.
Without ever doing that?
Yeah, I mean, doing 2/3 of what he's doing now, you know?
I mean, some of it, Britt, has to be a greater confidence in Carl or even Naz as rim protectors behind him. Or Jade. I'd even throw Jaden in there too. If it's Jaden happens to be off ball, and you just compare that to Utah when it's like a Favors or a Bogdanovich. I mean, I know they had Hassan Whiteside there at the end, but that they didn't. Whiteside never played.
They didn't play the Twin Towers, right?
I mean, how often did Rudy ever play in Utah with someone he had confidence subbing in for him on the back line if he decided to leave it? That's I mean, part of it is Rudy just embracing it more, and honestly, Finch and the coaching staff convincing him to be to be doing that. But part of that is
Absolutely.
Rudy's like, okay, yeah, like Carl's pretty good at that. Nas can get in the way. Like Jaden can do. I mean, that's part of being big, is being big at the back line, even if Rudy's out on the perimeter or on the bench too.
Right. And I do think that it can't be understated. I mean, Conley in for D'Lo, huge upgrade. And defensively this year versus last year, not huge upgrade, but a significant upgrade. Jaden, another year of familiarity, slight upgrade. All over the place. I mean, there are ways in which this team
and Carl, man, like honestly,
better. I understand what you're saying. I do think, I
don't think we should. I don't think we should diminish the Carl part of it. Like,
I think you're probably right. I just
think about it, man. Think about it. He's guarding Paul George, Terrence Mann, Kawhi Leonard, all this. I remember specifically like 2 years ago.
Yeah, I had huge reservations. You're right.
Exactly. Like, I remember doing a podcast being like, this was crazy. The Wolves played the Kings and they put Karl Anthony Towns on Mo Harkless. We've never seen this before. Cat had just always exclusive. It was a crazy concept that you would put Karl on any sort of wing. It'd be like if the Clippers came out and they were like, all right, we're putting Zubac on KD or Vucevic out on a wing or Valanciunas out on that. Like, Karl was in that.
Yeah,
you're right. I'm not saying Carl's like an awesome defender or anything right now, but he never, ever, ever did this stuff. Like the first 6 years of his career, was never even asked to do it. Slowly has started being asked to do it and wasn't good at it. He wasn't good at it when they started playing him at the floor and guarding wings.
Because he never, I mean, there's two types of buy-ins going on here. Mm-hmm. Rudy bought into not always being a rim protector. Cat bought into being a power forward as much or more than a center. I mean, you remember after they'd signed Gobert or got the trade for Gobert, you asked Cat about, I asked Cat at his press conference, how you preparing to be a power forward if you lost any weight, He said, well, I'm actually still a center and I'm also a power forward. I mean,
that had to shift. That mentality had to shift.
And that was another buy-in. So, I mean, we just have to pinch ourselves that you have these things that are what we thought was what I thought, I'll just put it on me. I thought it was very unlikely that the Cat Rudy pairing defensively would ever work. And
it was because of that, correct?
Yeah, because of the fact that both of them had kind of narrow-minded concepts of who they were on defense. And Cat wanted to be a high wall center. I mean, that's what the only time he'd ever been good. Consistently good.
Defensively,
and so it was, I think, a dual buy-in, and then also you needed, defense. I don't want to keep, D'Angelo Russell is long gone, and we could use him as a punching bag forever. But the fact of the matter is, there's no getting around that D'Lo was a statue, whatever you want to call it. He just would not put his body in front of people on ball. He just wouldn't. He was good at deflections. He was good at kind of anticipating things, and he was very good at, in the Draymond Green role of calling out what's going on the court. I'll give him all of that.
Yeah.
But you need to be able to guard your fucking man. And that wasn't ever happening with D'Lo. And, when that happens, then things break down. Trust doesn't happen. And so Mike Conley does that. I mean, Mike Conley is smaller than D'Lo, but he's got some feistiness and some experience, and he puts his body on the line on defense.
Even in these matchups against big teams. I mean, these are like the Celtics and the Clippers are tough matchups for Mike Conley.
Right.
Mike Conley is like 6 feet flat.
Right.
And these, that stood out to me in the first Boston matchup I'm watching. I'm like, man, like in person, Mike Conley's the smallest dude on the floor here by far. But what Mike does, rather than like, I'm screwed, I'm at a disadvantage, he works for it, and that is, that's it actually kind of keeps the Wolves' big identity, right? By not having a small weak point, if that makes sense.
And what that also does, and also Ant's on ball tenacity. We just talked about Jaden, slightly recovering after slightly filling, those kind of feints and stuff. All of that goes into a sense of success and unity that strengthens the idea, if you're recalcitrant, as Rudy and Kat both were, in terms of saying, oh, I don't know if I'm going to do this. I like what I was doing before.
What's calcitrant mean?
Recalcitrant. Recalcitrant means kind of you're not really, you're unsure. You're cautious about buying in.
That had something to do with calluses.
No. You're recalcitrant.
Recalcitrant. Recalcitrant.
Yeah.
You hinted at this a little bit earlier after you were mentioning some of the Zubac stuff. What if LA hits more shots in this game? Because they could have. I mean, credit to this game and how it went, and the Wolves won, and they were up by like 16 with 5 minutes to go. It got close at the end. But there's like a little bit of a revisionist history to this, where maybe they hit another shot or two at the end of the game and we go, oh man, the Clippers going small actually hurt this team. And that's how they came back and beat them. Or, if they just hit, 2 or 3 more threes like they have been recently. And the Wolves made those threes hard. I'm not like,
right.
But it's, even if we're giving the Wolves credit for that, they could have hit a couple more of those. Like, they played awesome defense and Paul George hit the one in the corner. Mm-hmm. If it were a playoff matchup, I would feel more confident that Paul George, James Harden, and Kawhi Leonard don't combine to shoot 18 of 52 from the field like they did last night. How I guess I don't know. How do you weigh that? How do you factor that in?
Slightly.
Okay.
I don't want to put too much credence in it for a couple of reasons. Norman Powell played out of his mind.
Yeah, he banked in a three.
I mean, Norman Powell, there was one play late in the game where he caught the ball and whoever was coming at him came at him in the air, and he jumped to the left. And before he'd landed with both feet, shot a corner three off 1 foot and hit it.
We definitely had a good 2 minutes of talking.
And he was out of his mind.
We were like, how good would he be on this team?
Russell Westbrook hit 2 top of the key threes that everybody invites him to shoot, and he's been, for his career,
because Rudy was guarding him. They put once they went small, they put Rudy on Westbrook. Yeah.
For his career, he's been a terrible 3-point shooter overall. And you also have to factor in the fact that the Wolves up 16 with 5 minutes to go is almost a recipe for this team to let the rope slacken a little bit. They are not mature enough yet to really bury a team. Ant and Jaden, for the same reason that they get up for mano-a-mano on-ball defense, they slacken when they think the game is 90% won. I mean, that challenge is kind of over now. What's the next challenge?
Yeah.
And that's, Finch has mentioned this numerous times, more against Ant than Jaden. He protects Jaden because I think Ant is more durable in terms of he feels free to rip Ant whenever he feels like it, because Ant is, I'm rubber and you're glue, I mean, he doesn't care.
Recalcitrant.
No, he's not recalcitrant.
Oh, it's not. He's not. Let me grab another break here. We'll get there. Today's show is brought to you by Prize Picks. As well, I was just dinking around with this, looking at the NFL game site. If you listen to this on Monday afternoon, you can take a look at the maybe the Eagles Bucks slate of things they got going on there. They got Jalen Hurts at 225.5 passing yards. More or less than that. You go through it. They got a ton because it's the playoffs. It's fun to put like $5 on it. I did probably a really dumb one, but I thought it was fun. If Josh Allen and Mason Rudolph both throw for 2 or more interceptions, plus Josh Allen throws for more than 200 yards and Mason Rudolph throws for more than 150 yards. It all seems within the realm of possibilities. $20 entry that pays out, $4.90. These are things, obviously you're kind of stringing things together. They're hard to do, but like, put $5 on it. I think that's a fun extra sort of thing to have going on in these games. And we do have through Prize Picks, the $100 sign up bonus if you use the promo code Dane. NFL games again tonight, but also a bunch of NBA games going on as well. And they have every single sport for this. So prizepicks.com, Prize Picks app, promo code Dane for a $100 sign up bonus. All right, Britt, let's dig into the Ant stuff. I thought that we talked about defensively, how informative the way he played in isolation was, but I saw some growth in Ant last night, particularly in the things that I had become really concerned about with him as he dialed up his, desire to be more aggressive in the past 2-3 weeks. That's led to a ton of turnovers in the past 2-3 weeks and a little bit of like confusion with how the offense works. Ant's mental shift, as we know, was becoming more aggressive even when he was being double teamed. He's clearly been hammer coached on that in the last week. And the big shift I noticed early on in that game was when a double was coming, Ant was going before it got there. And that was a big shift from the Boston game. And if he's going to be aggressive, quote unquote, through double teams, this is the way it has to go. I asked Ant about it.
Yeah, and this, by the way, credit to you. This is a sage observation on your part because he bought into. I mean, you basically called this. You did. Listen to him.
Yeah, I'll play the clip.
Tonight when they were bringing the double, like you would go before the double got there, take a shot before it got there. Is that part, like when you're talking about being aggressive regardless of your double?
Yeah, for sure.
Is that how you do that?
Yeah, for sure. Because watching film like with Boston, it was bringing a double late. Like I would dribble, then the double would come. So getting the switch and going right away is now my new thing. Learn how to get better at that. So I think I did a pretty good job of that tonight.
And you took that one like 3 when the double was coming over.
Yeah, for sure.
That's kind of the same
You're just
thing,
trying to
right?
go quick. Yeah.
So you know what it's time for now? You know what the adjustment's going to be off of that? Defensively, it's going to be slow doubles. It's going to be more of like a trap, particularly if it's a high screen for Ant, they're going to kind of guide him towards the sidelines. Often like what the Wolves, when they played up in coverage, what they would do against Luka and Trae Young. They're not even really trying to – what's going to start happening if Ant's able to split these or go before he gets there, they're not going to trap it. It's just going to kind of be a shield where they're going to try and slowly push Ant towards the sidelines. And this is the difficulty. This is the tests of being a high usage, elite scorer, playmaker for this team. That was a really good adjustment. And honestly, reminds me a ton of Indiana Paul George. That was totally a Paul George thing. And he really used the shot for that. When he saw a double coming, he would look and he'd be like, all right, I have a second to get off it here, or I have a second to just pull up and shoot over him. And that, when I asked Ant about in that second question about it, when I was watching that live, I was like, man, that reminds me a lot of Paul. I mean, not even just Indiana Paul George, but Paul George in general. It's about being decisive, quick, going, shooting, whatever it is. You can't wait for the defense to slowly bring that double. You got to beat him to the point there. And Ant still had a handful of turnovers in that. I was going through the clips. It wasn't really when they were putting a double on him. They were just kind of he just kind of had some dumb turnovers. Like he just passed to Russell Westbrook one time, airmailed another guy. But growth, for sure, growth in Ant's aggression, particularly against doubles.
Paul George has been my prototype for Ant for like the past 2 years.
It has been. I forgot about that. You haven't said that in a while, but you were on that. You really were on that.
It's just because remarkable all-around game that occasionally gets left on the table a little bit too much. Not as you're always left wanting a little bit more from Paul George. You know what I mean? He's got so many great things about him. And you always are waiting for Ant to do that next blossoming. And along the way, it's easy to underestimate what you're getting because there is, I mean, both Paul George and Ant are players that, like, you think they're having a decent game, and you look up and they've got like 23, 7, and 5 in the third quarter, you know?
Yeah, right.
I mean, and that type of game always is impressive to me, because what that means is they're alternating between playing individually and playing within a team concept. And the more that Ant reminds us of Paul George, the more we see that happening. What is exciting to me is that Ant has an athleticism that George lost in that terrible injury.
Yeah, I thought you were gonna say never had. I was like, I know he lost it.
Exactly. I mean,
left
what was
him
that?
at a
Was that like
stanchion.
Olympic trials or something?
Yeah.
Anyway, I think it was either an Achilles or just an awful knee
It was
injury
a
or something.
shattered leg, right? He just
Oh, it was
ran into
something.
this-
It was just
yeah.
awful. And he really has not been that phenomenal athlete since. But imagine Paul George as the old Paul George in his prime, only with experience.
Yeah.
And that's what Ant, I think, can become. He can become a better Paul George, which is pretty damn good, because Paul George is like like an 8-time, 10-time All-Star.
Right. No, absolutely. I think, I mean, it's about navigating and learning, and I think it's fair to say after Christmas there was a bad week for Ant,
Oh yeah.
and not even I'm not necessarily talking about performance, but like a bad learning week where he goes, here's an issue. There's 2 paths to solve it here. And the path he went down to try and solve it was not the best one. There's like another path off of it that can get him back onto it. And I think that's, in theory, what he's doing. And what Ant does is he makes changes based on failure. If the Dallas game doesn't happen and the Boston game doesn't happen in those sort of ways, I don't think he plays the way he did last night. He needs to kind of learn off of those things. And I really believe that to be a truism of Ant. And it's why when I think about like the playoffs and stuff like that, I don't want Ant to have to learn a lesson in the playoffs and lose a series because he hasn't learned it yet, and then come back and do it again in another year. You know what I'm saying? Like that's a possibility here. Whatever you want to talk about, the way he's being guarded or whatever the team does to try and take him away. If Ant can't figure that out in like the second round of a playoff series this season and has to learn from that failure and apply it next season, there's a little bit of danger to that. That's fine for him as a 22-year-old. That'd be perfectly reasonable and understandable to not have all the answers there. But this team, where it's at financially and the ages of some of their other players, like, you can't really afford Ant to learn by failure in the playoffs. So that's why it's so important to me that Ant is having small failures, adjusting and growing from them during the regular season. So you've seen everything by the time the playoffs happen, and they can go, hey, Ant, they did this to you. That's why we lost game 2 against Denver in this series or whatever. You know how to make this change and make the change, because you don't want to lose a series because of something that could have been learned.
I have 2 reactions to that.
Okay.
One is, I think that Ant learns from failure is a brilliant observation. I'll probably steal it for something I write, because I think it's very accurate. But where I disagree with you is it's a bad thing, because I think that Ant has so much ability that he wants to find out what is a failure to him. And what is a failure to Ant is a higher bar than it is to most people. So that what logically might seem like a failure might not be a failure to Ant. And if he finds that out, then when he does have failures, he's able to have what he's already banked be part of the mixture of his adjustment. And so, and also what I would say is, if he can learn off Dallas and Boston in the Clipper game, and they've got like 30 games, 40 games left, and they've got a first round series or whatever. It's a journey. And I think that the macro look at this is that if Ant does learn from failure, that already is a really good trait for somebody his age.
Yeah.
Think Jaden McDaniels, who had repeated failures in terms of the way he guards people sometimes and fouls people or his temper or whatever. I mean, there's some, and he's young too. I mean, I'm not saying it's uncommon. What I'm saying is what's somewhat uncommon is that Ant can make those adjustments. And again, totally think you're right about that. What is really interesting about Ant is that he has this superhuman confidence and ego in himself that is like the epitome of arrogance, and yet also has the real world like walking alongside that he occasionally knows he has to dip into. It's like you hear him in the post games, like right after they had a break or something. I don't know what it was, but he announced in the locker room, from now on, I don't care. I'm going at everybody. I went into tonight thinking I'm just going to take a shot whenever I get the ball or whatever. I mean, he literally said all this.
Yeah.
And
multiple times.
And then he did. Within a minute, he said, when they said, what's the problem? Well, the problem, we don't get off the ball. We're not moving the ball. And, I mean, it was like, this is who I am. This is what I do. Well, what's the problem here? Well, everything I just said I do. That's the problem.
Right.
But it doesn't apply to me, maybe, And so that type of attitude, that mixture of, all right, you're really going to have to show me that this is bad before I say, yes, this is bad. And even then, I've got a storehouse of what I know is good, so that my adjustment is going to be maybe not as big of an adjustment as you want me to make. But if I keep failing in small increments, I'll get there,
Yeah.
But I'm not going to get there based on your faith. I'm going to get there based on my faith.
Yeah. That is true. It's a weird sort of, you got to like kind of play, if you're Finch or like, Chris Hines, his
right.
Personal development coach, if I'm saying that right. You got to kind of, you got to find interesting ways to put the carrot at the end of the stick. I always, when I think about learning from failure with Ant, I vividly remember going in, like as soon as I walked into the locker room after Game 5 against Denver, the Wolves, are eliminated. It's like as soon as
the chair throw.
No. Well, this is post chair. I guess it's related to the chair throw. But or it was about 3 minutes after the chair throw,
right.
And I walk in there and he's sitting at his locker, and it's like with his phone, it just does a full spike onto the ground, but I didn't even know about like the chair throw really at this time or anything.
right.
But my immediate reaction to that was, hell yeah, like this pisses you off. This pisses you off. That this, obviously, like don't break your phone, like don't throw the chair, like control the rage or whatever. But Ant needs to be reminded of that, and this is the role of a coaching staff, right? By his people, that so as to avoid that feeling that we know with 100% certainty that he hates. You need to preempt that by studying and knowing and understanding all of these things, which he is doing and learning. So what you call it in small increments.
Right.
He's just got to remember that feeling, and that feeling without foresight and planning, because it's the NBA and because there's so many damn good teams, that feeling comes if you're not playing on the same like smarts level, thinking level, learning level, growing level as everyone else is. And I go back and forth with it. I'm like, I need to be more aggressive stuff. I've talked about that like 10 times in the last couple of weeks. I'm just like, that's not it, man. Like, that's just not it, and then last night, and credit to him, that is it. What he just said there, what somebody told him, what he learned I don't even know if, I guess, a coach told him that or anything. Maybe he just self-learned that. Whatever. But those small incremental failures that lead to change, that then lead to growth, that's where this thing goes up with Ant. Like that's how it keeps moving up, and he keeps climbing the ladder in the NBA of dominant players.
And you know what's important is that that frustration and that hating to lose and that it fades, but it doesn't fade away for him. In other words, some guys just get pissed in the moment, or like 48 hours later, the vestiges of that are not tappable. They're not, they're not right at the ready. And I'm thinking, I remember the question was a talking head from Denver when we were in Denver, and had just like had a fabulous game 2 or something, or whatever it was, or maybe it was game 3. Anyway, he got like 35 and whatever. And the person was saying, when somebody said, if you're a star, so on and so forth, he says, I'm not a star. This is a question. He answered for somebody else.
When we were at that practice in the weird gym, the weird tiny gym, where Josh Minot and Tim Conley were playing one-on-one.
Well, and Tim Conley was helping Josh Minot with dunks, lob dunks.
Yeah, they were playing one-on-one. That's what was happening. But it was that gym, a little tiny shitty gym in the Denver facility. Yep.
And the Denver female talking head, I wish I knew her name, but she wasn't. I don't mean to say she's fairly smart, I thought. But she said, well, what would make you a star then? Because he said, I'm not a star, whatever.
Yeah.
And he just said it very calmly. He said, win a playoff series.
Yeah.
I mean, that is the right answer. But if you're going to slam your phone down, it's easy to think that's performative, or that's a temper tantrum because you didn't get what you want. If 3 or 4 days earlier, when somebody's telling you you're a star and you just calmly say you're not and leave it at that, and it's only after a follow-up question that you basically say, why I don't think I'm a star because we're not winning as a team. Mm-hmm. That's when that's when you say, all right, he throws the phone because that's connected to the guy 3 days earlier saying I'm not a star because the team's not winning.
It's connected to his goals.
And that's when you say, give that man all the money, Seriously, that's what you want. That's what you want to lead your team.
Continuing with this game a little bit, I wrote down in my notes, tough opponent for Cat and Naz. It's, well, one, the obvious part is that they have to guard, like Paul George. It's just like kind of to the Cat Mo Harkless thing I was talking about earlier today.
Right.
I was thinking about after the game, I'm like, remember when Naz's just matchup was Russell Westbrook for like 6 minutes? No switch. Like, you got 0. And I was like, if you would have told me that 3 years ago, that little chubby boy Naz Reid defensive matchup in a game against Russell Westbrook would be Russell Westbrook, I was like, man, that's crazy. Just an evolution. And I just want to give Naz, we were giving Cat credit for that earlier, of the mental adjustment, physical body adjustment, taking on the challenge of honestly guarding the style of player that you've never really guarded before in your life. Those guys continue to take that challenge. You notice that in particular in these matchups, but it is a challenge. Naz only played 2 shifts last night. It was like an 8-minute and 6-minute shift.
Right. And was very good in both of them.
But it's just it's a hard defensive matchup, and it's also, I also put down, I guess this is just my opinion, I can't say this definitively, but I think it's a shoot it versus drive it game for both of them against the Clippers. And I think, particularly for Cat's more comfortable driving than he is shooting. Naz is probably more comfortable shooting than he is driving, or leans into that a little bit more. But this matchup kind of, almost demands you to let go of some of that driving stuff. Not completely, but, the split is typically 50-50. You got to kind of move into like 80% shoot it against them. I think to that end, that was a good experience. And like, you can show them that tape, whether it's the Clippers or somebody else who guards in a similar way, be like, hey, this is like, you got a half a step of space, Carl or Naz, those got to be threes. Got to go. Like, they're loading up, they're recovering out. We need you to, it's tempting to take the drive because they're closing out to you, but you got to remember this is Kawhi Leonard or this is Paul George. Like,
right.
There was, I just remember I think it was the first quarter, Carl was 2 for 3 from 3 and 0 for 2 from 2. Plus he had traveled on a drive.
Right.
And it was just like, it was just harder to drive, right. That's what that opponent presents. And I think, I don't know. I was going to say,
you remember Naz's first shot. Go back and look at Naz's first shot.
Was it a corner three? That seems to be
it was almost a corner three. It was like halfway between the wing and the corner.
Yep.
And I think it was maybe Jaden or somebody gave him like a 5-foot pass.
Mm-hmm.
But he did one of those, catch and shrug threes that, splashed. He was in the game like maybe 7 seconds when that happened. And it was a tough three.
Yeah.
And I will tell you, Naz has his faults, and there are some elements of his game that, he can still be attacked on defense in many ways. But if you have a guy come into the game who can give you offense at all three levels, at different times.
And right away.
And this team having, what this bench, everybody wanted to have a parade over Kyle Anderson's 4 for 6 last night. And I understand it because the alternative for the past month has been, terrible.
Grenade, yeah.
But Kyle Anderson has not been the same player he was a year ago. It comes and goes with his shot. J-Mac didn't play last night because of the reasons you mentioned about it being a tough matchup for Conley, but J-Mac is not a great shooter. It's left to Naz to be the guy, and that's why, Catter, Ant, a scoring starter is out there with them almost all the time. And, I feel like it should be Ant. I just think that Naz and Ant, man, that is... People ought to realize what they have because...
Yeah, it's got to be targeted. That's a big takeaway from me from going back to the Boston game, playing without Rudy. In that game, you got to see 48 minutes of like a spread floor look and what that meant for Ant and for Carl and for Naz. Like, I would really like to see them lean into a noticeable shift in offensive identity when Rudy leaves the floor. Like, we talk about that. We used to talk about the toggle defensively with Rudy on the floor, drop versus up in coverage. I think they got to toggle. I think it's the path to being a better offensive team. Rudy's off the floor. Right away you go, all right, we're going 5 out, or we're like maybe Anderson's like at the nail as a kind of screener sort of thing. You got to spread the floor because that's great for Ant.
Right.
And that it can be great for Naz. And it can let Carl get to his pump and go game some more too. Just vacate the dunker spot when Rudy's off the floor. You got to have 36 minutes a night of dunker spot occupation by Rudy. Lean into a spread floor. Because and the main thing why I thought of it was it's Ant and Naz. That's how you unlock some greater offense there.
And if you put slow-mo at the nail as the way station when you need a way station, then you can basically do your actions. The thing that is great about Ant and Naz is that if they're in a rhythm, they are deadly, and they're also more apt to pass. And both of them help the other one get in a rhythm because of spacing. And everybody knows when Naz comes on the floor that's a guy that has to be considered, And so if Ann is on the floor, there is a reason both offensively and defensively. And I've really begun to see, I don't have anything to back this up except common sense to some extent. Ant and Nas have phenomenal defensive rating together. And I think a lot of it is the fact that the ball goes in the hoop so much. And they don't have so much transition to work against.
Yeah.
You know?
I would assume that connects because we don't think of them as
being people who can just, bulwark defenders,
Right. This is one of their best shooting games of the season.
Yeah.
77% at the rim, 50% from mid-range, 50% from three. That was a 66.4 effective field goal percentage. It was their fourth best effective field goal percentage of the season. Best one was that Pelicans game where Zion and everyone was hurt, and the Pelicans, like Matt Ryan, played 32 minutes.
Yeah,
the next best one,
Portland the other night.
Well, no, that's coming. Number two is Indiana. No Halliburton. The Pacers flew in day of.
They don't play defense anyway.
And they don't play defense anyways. The third best shooting game of the season for the Wolves was the Blazers on Friday, which was the worst.
And they played the JV, right?
Oh my God, that was terrible.
Yeah,
that's like one of those where you're like, I didn't need to come to this. And then last night against the Clippers was their fourth best shooting game from an effective field goal standpoint.
I continue to say, I didn't get a lot of help from Finch or anybody else in saying that I love their decision making. I actually thought Jaden McDaniels had one of his best decisions with the ball and in his own position, being able to move without the ball, moving the ball, and shot selection. All three of those things have not been great for him this year. I've ripped Jaden plenty, and I went into that game sour on him just based on, recent results. And he had just a fantastic first quarter where he was.
Yeah, I don't remember as you or John, maybe as John was like, was that the Jaden's best?
Yeah, that's
quarter
right.
of the season?
John did say that. Yep.
Yeah.
And a lot of that was he had a drive and kick game, even a couple of times where, it's interesting that I think of three of the most interesting plays or good plays that Jaden made. Two of them were driving to the basket and then kicking to the man almost directly behind him. So he had to spin his body and get the ball out to him. And then
it looked like a Celtics or Thunder drive, man. That's what Celtics and Thunder games look like. For real.
I know. It's a shame move, right? You're right. Yeah. And then the other one is when McDaniels did it on a shot. He did a Steve Nash under the hoop, and everybody thought he was going to dish it out to the goal. All of a sudden, he turned around, shocked everybody by a little turnaround 2-footer underneath the rim in the lane. So his about face game was superb last night.
Yeah, he's been going back and forth.
Good
last night. I guess the Boston game he got in foul trouble.
He's also been
great
going
against
half
Dallas,
to half, quarter to quarter.
Orlando.
Too,
so. Yeah. It's inconsistent from him, but at least there are the flashes.
And last night, he was really good last night. I know he made, he had 4 assists early in the second quarter and finished with 4. So obviously that didn't translate.
Yeah.
And he wound up with 4 turnovers. And a couple of them, one of them was actually a really good idea that he just didn't see. It's kind of like in football where the quarterback doesn't see the linebacker, just sees the cornerback,
Sure.
And he threw the ball right to, I think it was Harden or somebody. But his other ones also, I think, were relatively well-intentioned. The fact that Jaden is trying to move the ball rather than come into 3 defenders, which Finch always blames Cat and Ant for and doesn't say enough about how often Jaden has done it. And also his catch and shoots, he waited patiently for that catch and shoot. And sometimes the longer you wait, the more the defense forgets you're there and you're even more open. Right. And that clearly was the case on his first one. And I just thought overall his positioning game, his defense is almost always going to be there, even if he has a tendency to foul too much and get let the temper get the worst of them. But offensively, enabling, he just played like a great fifth option. You know, the other
which is
night.
the role.
And I will tell you, that is one of the reasons I think they had such a good game, is that guys like Kat and Jaden and Ant, who could be guilty of bad decision making, there weren't nearly as many going through traffic and not getting off it. You know, so hats off.
Yeah, I guess. I mean, it was a lot of turnovers too, and that's the. It was a great shooting game, but it wasn't a great offensive game. It was the 4th best shooting game of the season. It was the 13th best offensive efficiency game of the season, and that is turnovers. And Jaden contributed to that. Jaden had 4 turnovers. Kat had 4 turnovers. Ant had 5 turnovers. That still exists here, and that, like, much like Rudy Gobert in the background waving at the rim, like that is in the background of this team. That remains an issue. You know?
I agree. And there were 23 points off turnovers, but almost all of that was fourth quarter stuff. And some of that was like Clippers desperation stuff. Where
the second quarter, when the Clippers came back to, there was a very much a need Mike Conley out there. Can his 5 minutes of rest get over soon, and so Finch can get him back in the game. I mean, there's the need, even as we note Ant getting better against some double teams, Carl toning down the stray voltage. This team is still a wildly turnover prone team that is wildly dependent on Mike Conley to be like the sobering breath of fresh air. And that's a big part of this figuring things out over the course of the season, is those 15-20 minutes a night when Mike isn't on the floor. Can we play basketball without giving the ball to the other team consistently? That's the question.
I would agree with all of that. I would say that if that happens against a worse defense, I know the Clippers are not ranked very highly on defense.
Yeah, but they play the gaps, they're long. They're you're right. They are
they're
easy
a great deflection team.
Sure.
I would think. I haven't looked the stats up,
but they were last night.
Yeah, and I do think that it's hard for me to get mad at the Wolves, the way the Wolves played offense last night, while granting everything you just said.
Yeah, no, I'm more talking big picture. It's still a thing.
Picture, that will always be. I don't know if that'll always be an issue, but I think on a team that has Rudy Gobert and Ant and Kat, I think all those folks have proven to be high turnover players.
Yeah, fumbles for Rudy, charges for Kat, bad passes for Ant. Those are,
and then the slow-mo factor. The other thing, I mean, everybody wants to focus on slow-mo not hitting shots, and I think this is an outgrowth of slow-mo not hitting shots. But his turnover ratio was way up.
Last night?
No,
or
for
just
the season.
Recently?
Yeah. I'm guessing, I don't know this, but his turnover percentage, I bet, is top 3 on the team.
Like Ant and Kat being 1 and 2, probably.
I don't know. I think Rudy might be right in there too. Hard to say.
He gets enough touches, but like the frequency with which he does. Yeah. It's a thing that, again, looms in the background. It's the reason they're still 17th on offense in the NBA.
20th now. Well, 17th by cleaning the glass.
Cleaning the glass, yeah. It's like almost exactly league average in terms of what they're doing. That's the thing, and that's why we're hoping maybe at the lighter schedule you do see 10 straight games where turnovers is down. That's the real encouraging sign as this team continues to prove, as again last night's game did, proving that they belong in this level that they're at. They deserve a claim. They have won a ton of games, and they've competed against really good teams and oftentimes beaten those really good teams. But as you're trying to grow and build, as they say to us every single day, what's the next building block that comes on top of where they're at now? As it has been for the past month, it's continuing to turn the ball over a little bit less, because they are not a great shooting team. They're not going to shoot 77 at the rim, 50 from mid range, and 50 from three night to night. And if you're playing the Clippers, and the Clippers do have Zubac, and they are hitting more threes themselves, whatever, the Wolves need to be better offensively as well. And the way to do that is to as always, limit turnovers. You got any last final thought, or we can wrap this up here?
Well, I mean, I guess one of the things that I'm wondering about, when you mention ways they can improve, I'm beginning to wonder, and we talked about it just for a sentence or two last night, sitting next to each other. Is it eventually going to be time to give Shake Milton another run? I mean, I think that they need to find the trading deadline is February 8th. Mm-hmm. And J-Mac didn't play last night because of his size. And I'm a big J-Mac guy. I just spent 2 columns arguing that he needs to get regular burn. And if they're not going to do that before there is a trade, they've invested $10 million in Shake Milton. I don't think
five next year's non-guaranteed or team option or whatever.
All right,
$5 million contract. Yeah.
They need to figure out what they want to do with that second unit rotation, because they can't continue to punt that. I don't think
I think it's punted till the deadline, man. We're running out of time. You know, the deadline's in less than 4 weeks, right? Like,
yeah.
I mean,
but they have an opportunity now. They play a soft schedule.
That's a good point. That is a good point. Okay, so this is good to mention. They did only go eight guy rotation. McLaughlin, Brown, and Milton all didn't play. If one of them were to have played in that game, which of the 3 of them are you saying? Shake is who you would have gone?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I just think first of all, he can defend big wings. Better than I think Troy. No, I think better than Troy. Shake Milton can defend big wings.
Well, I mean, for a ninth man, I don't know. I mean, maybe.
I mean, his defensive rating is pretty good, and
I'm not going off of that. What do you think? What does your eye test tell you about Shake Milton defensively?
My eye test tells me that he's had a very discouraging season. And we should find out whether or not this is a Bryn Forbes situation or a situation that he can give you 2/3 instead of 1/4 of what you thought you had.
Yeah.
And if he can give you 2/3, then all this, because, and this, I'm not going to open this up like 90 minutes into a podcast or something, except to say that people who think you're going to get a very good backup point guard have to start thinking about what teams want for that very good backup point guard, whether it's Tyus Jones or somebody else.
Sure.
Different teams want different things, but a lot of people want youth, whether it's in the form of promising players already on the roster or high draft picks. And the Wolves don't seem like they're in the mood to give up one of those things and don't have the ability to give up the other of those things.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So I'm saying preemptively, before you get put in a position where you have to give up something you don't want to give up, find out if what you have is worth keeping and maybe papering over, giving you a semblance of what you need.
Yeah. From what I've heard is like, and this is just kind of normal with the market right now at, a month in advance of the deadline. It's like pretty much all of those guys, right? Like the type of guys you'd want to acquire and plug into the rotation in a meaningful way for the Wolves, whether it's a Alec Burks or a Tyus Jones or, something like
right.
The price for now on that is a first. And that can, as I think it often ends up being the case, the guys that they're holding out for a first for, nobody ends up bidding that high. And then it turns into, 3-4 seconds or something like that. That is going to, how the market just settles out, I think is going to do a lot of determining what the Wolves, can do there, because literally they don't have like
20. Is it 2030? When is their first available first?
Yeah, that would be right. Yeah. 20. or
2031?
No, 2029, right? I should know that.
Well, that's right. Well,
but is that
the earliest it's 2029, and it might be 2031. I don't know.
Well, Rudy 7
because
years
I think
out
the
in
29 doesn't confer or something happens. There's some right at the end there, the swap or
22.
whatever.
Yeah, 29. No, I think you're whatever. I should know. I'm trying to do like 7 years out math.
Yeah, exactly. Well, that's
So,
what we mean.
2022.
What GM is going to want to, get rid of a really good player and then tell
they traded 23,
base,
25, 27, and 29. You're right. Yeah.
So tell your fan base, we're going to get the 2031 pick for this guy, and think of that.
Yeah, right.
Somebody 48 years old is going to okay, I'm going to be 56. Let me see. I don't think so.
Yeah,
I think that's a great idea.
But anyways, I think the market is going to kind of solve it. I'd be pretty shocked if they don't address it in some sort of form or fashion. I'll just say, like, for me, my answer to that, if you had to play one of the three last night, it would be Troy Brown Jr. I feel more confident about the offensive impact he can have, just a less volatile offensive player than Shake is. And I don't know, maybe you are right that Shake's a better wing defender. If so, it's close. There's similar realms of B- wing defender.
Troy Brown in his last 5 games where he's had significant minutes has not impressed me on defense at all.
But he's in the rotting corpse lineups.
No, I get it.
He's been out there with the J-Mac, Anderson, Gobert, or what the hell are we doing offensively lineup? It's and maybe he contributes to that too. We're picking through the lesser options on the line. I mean, it's J-Mac's spot right now. He just didn't play.
Yeah,
he played
exactly.
the previous 6, right?
And and I think he has a tenuous hold because J-Mac's superpower is net rating, and J-Mac has been a minus the last 3 or 4 games in a row. So
it's true.
Maybe even J-Mac can't save that second unit.
Yeah.
In which case, believe me, I wouldn't say let's take a flyer on Shake Milton. That's not a position of strength.
Yeah,
you say that,
Yeah. It's a good point with the bad teams coming up, though. All week, Monday through Friday, it's just they have the 2 games, Wednesday in Detroit, Thursday against the Grizzlies. Detroit stinks. Memphis just lost Desmond Bane, and it's a back-to-back. It's going to be a week where we see some players, whether it's just garbage time or whatever. And I think it is kind of going to be the last sort of hurrah of who of these guys, is part of this. Do we need to be in the rotation? Who's expendable, salary matching, whatever. We're past the 16-game death march. There's going to be there's going to probably be some rest or whatever happening here coming up, and we'll see, which I'm interested to see. Should we call it quits?
Yep.
He's Britt Robson. You can read him over at MinPost, minpost.com, and follow him on Twitter. We will 2 of us will talk again. I guess not till next week. Chris tomorrow from Detroit, Tuesday afternoon. That'll come out a little bit later, kind of late afternoon. That'll come out on Tuesday. Kyle and I are going to go live after the Detroit game on Wednesday because I'm not going to that game. And then Jason and I will talk after the Grizzlies game on Thursday. So kind of reshifted around the schedule this week, but we'll have the 4 normal guests in here, and we'll get to talk about some more Wolves basketball till tomorrow with Chris, Tuesday afternoon. He's Britt. I'm Dane. Thanks for doing it, Britt. Peace out.
How I'm feeling, man, I hope it never stop, yeah. Green and hot so you can find me in the crowd, yeah.